Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by AgDirect, and I've got Greg Roberg back on here. Man, about tried to combine three names there at one time, Greg. I got you back on.
How are you,
got
Casey?
you back on. Good, man. How you doing, man?
I'm good. You can call me lots of things. Just don't call me late for dinner.
I hear you. I hear that one. Yeah, so it's good to have you back on, Greg. A lot of stuff moving around here when you start looking at interest rates and what's been going on in that environment. I guess we'll start there first. Take a look what the Fed said. Hey, we're gonna pause a little bit on these interest rate hikes, but we're definitely going to come back in. We just don't know when, and raise some more rates and don't get used to it. I guess kind of your reaction to that, and what's AgDirect's kind of thought process now moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. That seems to be kind of a moving target every day,
Yeah,
Casey.
it does.
Depending on, whoever seems to have the loudest voice that day, the market seems to react. Mm-hmm. So the Fed meets, Federal Reserve they meet 8 times a year. Mm-hmm. And it's different every year. But this year it was May, June, and July. So the Fed went up in May. They said in June we're going to take a break. There's a 98% chance or something like that they're going to go up in July. They meet the 25th and 26th of July. So the market is expecting another quarter hike on July 26th. They take August off. They come back in September. Who knows what they'll do then? And then we've got November 1st and mid-December after July. So the smart money, or the experts say we'll see one more bump in July, and probably a 50-50 chance we'll see one more yet this year. So the good news is we should be on the end of this. Mm-hmm. Typically, in a presidential election year, which 24 will be, the Fed tends to kind of stay the course. That's why my personal opinion would be is we'll see 2 more hikes, so they don't have to do another hike in the 24. Mm-hmm. But some new information is coming out as you look at about 18 months from now. There's about a 99% chance we'll have lower rates from the Fed, or the Fed funds rate, in December of 24. Okay. So the market's starting to build in a reduction in Fed funds rate sometime in probably the second half of 24. So time will tell. Yeah. Good news is hopefully most of the pain is over. Bad news is we're probably going to have rates where they're at here for probably the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess it's something to look forward to, I guess, right? Have something to do there. It'd be interesting to watch and see what happens if the Fed comes back in July and says, hey, you know what, we're not going to raise rates, and see what the market does. Because I think the market would just go screaming hot crazy if they saw that there weren't going to be any interest rate hikes in July, because maybe that would indicate that there would be maybe that December timeframe you would see one more, and that might be it. But it's going to be definitely something to pay attention to and watch, because it has such a everyone's trying to guess the market with these algorithms that they have now, and they have them all programmed. And I love watching when something happens that's not supposed to, and it just blows everything up. So to the upside,
the market's pretty jittery right now. Yeah, as I mentioned before, it kind of depends on whoever's talking. The market can react to, but the one that seems to have the loudest voice in the room is Chairman Powell. Yeah, and he's been very clear. They're not going to take the brakes off, until they're sure we're at 2% inflation. So he's doubled down. It's pretty much foreseen conclusion. We're going to get a bump in July. Yep. Just a 50-50 chance if we see anything by Christmas.
Yep. They did say, he did say we might stop raising, but it doesn't mean we're going to go backwards anytime soon. Exactly. And that's going to be that's the true tell. When that first starts to happen, that's going to change the dynamics as well. So interesting things to watch. Plenty of fodder there for a podcast called the Moving Iron Podcast to talk about over the next course of these 24 months or so. So
a couple of things I watch is mid-month the CPI inflation numbers always come out.
Yep.
So for listeners, that's always something to keep an eye on. It tells you if inflation is going up or down or staying about the same. That'll help give us some insights of what the Fed's going to do. And then always at the end of the month, there's some consumer expenditure information or data that comes out. So those are kind of two events each month that can kind of give us some insight. Certainly the market is watching those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. CPI stuff has been, oddly, it's been kind of watching that move, and it's been, the CPI numbers have been moving in a different direction than what the market would tell you that they're moving. And so you're starting to see some, the inflationary stuff you're seeing there is starting to come down quite a bit, and it's been coming down for a long time. So interesting to watch that move. And Rich Posson comes on here and talks about that quite a bit. And it's he's never been on the recession train, and a lot of people are starting to change their tune a little bit about a possible recession. So your guess is as good as mine as to what's actually going to happen. So we'll have to pay attention and stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah. So I feel pretty confident saying the largest pain is over as far as the amount of rate hikes and the pace of it. So that's good news. I'm an optimist, so I wake up every morning like we're one day closer to get through this.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right, let's talk about some programs you guys have going on over at AgDirect. One of the things I think that's, especially this time of year, as we start looking at grain handling and those kind of things, you have some special programs on skid steers and wheel loaders.
Yes, our Load It program, we just came out with that here this month, July. So skid steers and wheel loaders have special lease residuals.
Okay.
So it gets those payments down for anybody that's looking at a lease. Right now, we're seeing a lot of cash buy-in, KC, and loans or purchases more than leases. But I think folks will start taking a closer look at leasing, when the payment makes sense.
Yeah,
and so
for sure.
Encourage folks to go out, take a look. You can go to agdirect.com, or you can upload our mobile app on AgDirect Mobile, and you can just click interest rates, or you can click special lease rates. We also have a combine program with some better residuals on combines. If people particularly looking for adding another combine or maybe replacing combines. I've heard you say there's a lot of good late model used combines out there, and we've got some good residuals on used combines to help get those off dealers' lots. So check us out. That mobile app is really handy. You can see all of our rates. You can see our lease programs. You can run quotes. You can check out quite a few things just in the palm of your hands there.
Awesome. All right. So, Greg, what's the mobile app? It's just AgDirect app. Go to the App Store. You can find it out there anywhere.
Yeah, just type in AgDirect Mobile, whether you go to Google Play or the App Store. It's free. It's very easy to use. So it's got everything there that you might want to know about AgDirect and making a good buying decision.
Awesome. All right, Greg, folks want to reach out to you and get more information about other things going on in AgDirect. What's the best way to do that?
agdirect.com. We keep that updated. We got lots of good articles on there, about depreciation, what's going on in the market, things that AgDirect offers, features and benefits, some of those kinds of things. You can find a territory manager on there. Just click on, whatever state, and you can call the territory manager. If you want to talk to us, we're based in Omaha. We'd love to hear from you. 888-525-9805. Give us a call. We'll help you out.
Right on. Well, Greg, I appreciate you being on the podcast, and we'll talk to you next month.
Hey, great seeing you, Casey. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, bud. Take care. Hello, and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. This edition of the Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by the good folks over at AgDirect, and I got Tanner MIP from CoBank back here with me. Tanner, how you doing, man?
I am great, Casey. Great to be back with you.
Thanks for coming back on, man. It is. I think we have more stuff to talk. We could just spend 2 weeks doing a nonstop podcast and never cover everything that we've got to talk about here. We got a few things coming up. I got about 3 topics. Excuse me. That I want to hit and get your opinion on what you see happening out there. First, let's start with the Fed meets on the 25th. Everyone's assuming, hey, you know what, we're going to raise rates again. That's a foregone conclusion. That's going to happen. They've been beating their chest about no matter what happens, by God, we're coming back in and we're raising rates. What happens if they don't, Tanner?
Well, when the market has baked in a rate hike and then they don't do it, that would be probably extremely bullish on markets. I mean, it would shock the market in the opposite direction. So, but I suppose anything is possible, but inflation is still above the comfortable level. They still want to get it down to 2%. That's their target. We still got a little ways to go there. Inflation on a lot of important drivers of inflation, especially energy, has been down substantially, and that's the main reason why we saw the CPI come down, because fuel prices have come down so much. But if you look at other measures of inflation, rents are still very high. There's a lot of services are still very high, and so once you account for the volatile food and energy factors of inflation and take those out, it's still uncomfortably high for the Fed. And when you look at the language from the Federal Reserve, they're quite hawkish. Still, they still feel like they're on a mission, and so based on their language, based on the data, I think it's the market is fully anticipating a rate hike on the 25th. Now, if they did not, that would be a real shocker to a lot of people. The question is if they would come back in September and do it again then. And I think probably the market would be is anticipating that this may very well be the last one. But we got to see more data come in before we can really make that assessment. We got to have a couple more months of data to evaluate before we get to September.
Yeah, I'm with you, because I think if you look at where we're at, I just hypothetically, I think they're going to raise rates, but it was more one of those deals where I'm thinking about it from, they're going to try to, I think they might squeeze in one or two more rate hikes this year, and then move it into 24. Since it's an election year, they're not going to try to jack it too much just because it's an election year and do the whole whatever. So,
well, you would hope that the Fed is apolitical, but
oh, come on, Tanner, you're better than that.
You never know. I mean, they present themselves
right?
as data driven, and I would like to believe that. Maybe that's my wishful thinking.
Yours and mine both, but yeah, right on. All right, so I agree with what you're saying there. So you take a look at the big news that came out this week. I think that has more of an impact than what people are giving it credit for, and a lot of it's already kind of been baked into this whole thing anyway. But this whole Black Sea corridor deal and what the UN's trying to do with Russia, and Russia's saying we don't care, we're shutting everything down. We're going to inspect every ship coming in and out. If they don't let us inspect it, we're going to blow them up, and it's a whole mess. They've done a pretty good job of blowing up critical infrastructure since they said no to Odessa. So even if they could come in, I don't know how much of that stuff's even operational to where they could even make it work. You start looking at the rail system situation between Ukraine and the rest of Europe, and it's a different gauge, so it's a whole thing. So I guess I'd like your kind of long-term thought about this a little bit. When you're looking at Ukraine, and it's the fourth largest grain producer on the planet, and you now have a place that is effectively offline for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
What's that doing to world supply? What's that doing to price? What's that doing to, another Arab Spring type situation popping up somewhere in the world, like we saw in 2012?
Well, there's a few things we need to unpack on Ukraine. First of all, their production is already down by half.
Sure.
Their grain production, and that was the market is already aware of that. That's not new news. Secondly, they've found alternative routes away from the Black Sea because of all this talk that Russia has done. Leading into them pulling out of the deal. They said they were going to pull out of the deal, and so the markets had been adjusting to that ahead of time. They'd stockpiled, buyers had stockpiled. At the same time, routes shipments have increased through the Danube River. That has been a release valve. relief valve on supply, and then overland with rail and truck. All of that is less efficient, but it is a way for that grain to move out of the country. And in fact, we imported some into the U.S. From Poland because Polish grain prices have dropped so much because of that exodus of grain out of Ukraine over the border into Poland. That dropped the Polish prices, and it made sense for the U.S. I think it was Ardent Mills that brought that grain over to Florida. It was several boat cargoes of wheat, or several loads of wheat, rather. So at any rate, the market has adjusted to this. What was probably not anticipated was that Russia was going to start sending missiles and drone attacks on Odessa, which is their major grain exporting port. And there was some question about whether Russia really meant it or not, because last time they did this, they said they were going to back out, and then they said, sorry, we're just kidding, we're going to stay in. And that was probably due to political pressure from Turkey and China, China being the number one destination of the grain shipments out of through the Black Sea corridor of Ukrainian grain, and Turkey being number three. They were both major beneficiaries. And Putin needs that political support. Well, so it's almost a little bit of a head scratcher here. Like, wow, Putin, you're really trying to upset your friends in China. Is that what you're trying to do here? I wonder what's going to happen next. They really have been over the last couple of days making a concerted effort to damage their grain exporting capabilities in the Black Sea, which is just going to further hasten the movement of Ukrainian grain into Eastern Europe over land via truck and rail, but mostly through the Danube River. And those shipments have increased substantially. So the market has adapted to this. Now, I think what the market is trying to figure out now is how much of these Black Sea shipments are really offline now. Is Ukraine going to be shipping any more grain whatsoever out of the Black Sea? What may happen, I think, the longer term here is that because of the grain movement or the grain shipments having to shift entirely through the Danube and overland into Eastern Europe, what's going to happen then is local prices in Ukraine are going to drop because that is so much more costly through those alternative transportation routes. And so that's going to lower cash prices in Ukraine. And that's ultimately, for this planting season, is probably going to reduce planted area for this fall's crop. It's going to be wheat that gets planted this fall. So it's probably going to further reduce some of the wheat acreage. But we're not going to see the direct impacts of that supply reduction until next harvest, which is a year from now. So a lot to unpack there, but who knew? You would think that China's going to tap on Vladimir Putin's shoulder and say, "Hey, knock it off! I want some of that grain." But remember, there are still alternative sources, still alternative origins. Russia is exporting wheat at a record pace, so that has been an alternative for grain buyers. Now, that being said, longer term, we still have some concerns about global supply. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily about Ukraine. Now we're talking a global picture here, really, Casey, about the impacts of La Nina or El Nino on Australia's crop. Now we've got some growing issues in India. So there's a lot to be concerned about here outside of Ukraine when it comes to supply and demand.
Okay, so that was the next thing I wanted to bring up and talk to you about, was just that very subject there was with India. So India has kind of been the glue that's been holding the world food supply together. As you look at rice and wheat, they've earlier last year they said, hey, we're gonna chill out on wheat exports. We're not going to stop rice exports. And about 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, they came out and said, hey, you know what? We're really thinking about maybe stopping rice exports rather. And we're going to start looking at what's best for India, and maybe becoming a net importer ourselves based on the last 7 years have been the best 7 years of agriculture in Indian history. So you start looking at that picture. Here we are, kind of at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to supply. I guess as you're looking at your crystal ball here, the wheat to rice ratios and all those things that are starting to come into play are starting to just get crazily far apart. I mean, just absolutely blowing up. Looking at pricing for wheat and those kind of things down the road, I've heard guys kick around $10-11 next year if everything kind of stays the same. When you're looking at that wheat market, what are your thoughts there long term?
I'd say, there's the bullish case longer term for sure, and I think, like I said earlier, this is more of a story about what's happening outside of Ukraine than what's happening inside of Ukraine. Right. So, as you pointed out, with rice and wheat, the stocks to use ratio on global wheat outside of China, and that's important because China is the biggest stockpiler of grains and oilseeds in the world, and those are non-tradable stocks. So the stocks to use ratio of wheat outside of China is the tightest since the 2007 crop year. So we got to go back more than a decade to see the stocks to use as tight as it is. And now we have India. Stocks to use on India outside of China, global stocks to use outside of China is the tightest in a couple of years. Now we have to take into consideration this announcement this morning that India is foregoing all non-basmati rice exports. And India accounts for 40% of the global rice trade. Well, this is going to be quite a shocker to the global markets. I think I would imagine there's going to be a lot of pressure on India to reverse this, although it has been it's been India's policy to maintain low food prices in that country. They've also been subsidizing farmers heavily with their inputs and guaranteeing grain prices. This is, you have to wonder how sustainable this is, because inside of India, I don't believe they're desperately short of supplies because the government had been stockpiling. So this may be it is obviously a political move for the favor of their rice consuming population, which is over 1 billion people. And so I wonder how long they'd be able to do this. I want to analyze this a little bit more, Casey, to see how sustainable this policy is. Because with India accounting for 40% of the global rice trade, if they just halt those exports suddenly, we're going to be in an extremely tight situation on rice. And you made the connection there a little bit ago about the wheat to rice price ratio. That's going to shift more demand over to wheat, because those are the two major food grains, wheat and rice. And if people outside of India cannot afford high rice afford high rice prices, then they're going to switch to consuming the alternative, which is wheat. Right. And so you're going to have a demand shift there, and those two are going to interplay, and that's going to put more demand pressure on wheat. And so now we start to see a quick tightening of the global food grain balance sheet. And we're talking, when we say food grain, wheat and rice combined. So a lot of this happening at us very quickly here with this announcement from India. Right now, the wheat market is responding mostly to what's going on in Ukraine, but I imagine here it's going to start to wake up to some of this shift in demand, perhaps from rice over to wheat.
Yeah. When you look at that big picture, and you look at what's going on in the U.S., I mean, we've got our wheat crop was what it was, right? It's not by any means a great crop. You look at, although I think there was some surprising points when they actually got the combines in the field, but in certain spots, but overwhelmingly it was a bad crop. When you're looking at So the corn crop that we have right now, there was all that concern moving up till these rains came in, and now we've saved what's available for the crop right now. Is it still going to be a banner crop? No one knows yet what that looks like. Obviously, it's not going to be a bumper crop, but it's going to. Where's it going to fall in at? And what damage was irreversible from the drought situation coming in earlier this year? And then you take a look at the heat that we see coming in now. This next week is really getting hot, and a lot of the rain that was in the forecast has been taken out. I know my neck of the woods out here, we're looking at 96, I think, is the coolest day for the next 10 days. And you start looking at how that's going to dry out pretty quick out here. You start looking at the pressure that's going to be put in the soybean market. Soybeans, we've seen what corn did after the report, the WASDE report here earlier this month. And it took off a huge amount of money off of soybeans. We saw everything kind of crash, and it all came back the next day. And it's been climbing up. We're at 550 December corn last time I looked, maybe a little more than that. Are you anticipating to see the price of soybeans run up based around this weather market that we're in? And if things assume that they continue the same pattern that we are expecting to see, could we see $7 corn again and $18, $19 beans?
Well, as long as we're going to be in this this warming pattern with the moisture condition we're in right now in the Midwest, that's definitely a possibility. July is the key month for corn. It's when it's entering pollination, and it's over half the crop is silking right now, and that's not heat is not good on that because some of it's it's moisture that's you can dry that. The silks are very moist, and so when it gets really hot, it can damage the pollination, and that's ultimately going to impact how many kernels you have on the cob. And so or on the corn, and so the drought and plus heat is a terrible combination at this point in time when the crop is in its most vulnerable state. So this is absolutely not good news for corn, and so we're going to need some cooler temperatures and some rain here very soon if we're going to maintain our top end of the yield potential. Remember also that we also had a major expansion in corn acreage in the June acreage report. Corn picked up over 2 million acres, a lot of that from soybeans. And so the market is still factoring that in as well. But right now, we know what the acres are. It is in expansion. And so right now, we do have a looser balance sheet on corn than we did last year. However, if we continue to see yield potential drop, and it could start dropping very quickly with these rising temperatures, then suddenly we could be in a tight balance sheet situation again with corn. So the market is having to dial in the heat and the drought right now and pricing in that possibility that things could get tight again on corn. Now, as for soybeans, the more critical month is going to be August. That's when it's going to be setting pods. Right now, the soybean crop is blooming, but the pod setting is going to be the very critical period, and that's happens mostly in August. And that's a little bit further out yet, but if we're going to be in this pattern, then it's going to be bad news for soybeans as well.
Right. Okay. All right, Tanner. I think that's probably a good place to stop. If your last thoughts there, if you're looking out at the remainder of 23 going into 24, what are your thoughts on what are you paying attention to as far as some real indicators that are going to change the way we look at business here between 23 going into 24?
Well, I think we saw it this morning. India decided to do their protectionist move. We'll see where that goes. I think the story is going to become more about the weather and El Nino. Right now in the U.S., that's absolutely the issue. But we need to see how this plays out for El Nino. In regards to an El Nino for South America, they don't begin planting our crop yet for several months. But if it doesn't play out as the way we tend to think of El Nino, which is generally positive for South America and Brazil especially, then we're going to be we could be in a tight situation again because ocean temperatures are different than what we normally see. The ocean temperatures are higher, and so that could throw off the El Nino trend. So And so we may not get the favorable weather in South America. So now if we have heat and drought in the U.S., plus perhaps less favorable growing conditions in South America as well, given that it is still a far ways out, that's still a possibility. And then now all of a sudden we're in a tight situation with corn in addition to wheat and rice. And now things can get quite uncomfortable for the marketing year ahead. So there's a lot to watch there. I think we really need to have some favorable weather here to turn things around.
Right on. Okay. Tanner, appreciate you being on the podcast, man. Good stuff as usual. Folks want to reach out to you, get more information about what it is that you're doing over at CoBank. What's the best way to do that?
Then go to our website, cobank.com, cobank.com, and then you can find our research on the Knowledge Exchange tab.
Tons of free information out there. That's really good stuff. You guys, go check that out. There's so much stuff out there for free. I feel guilty reading this out there. So.
Hey, we're part of the Farm Credit System. We're here to serve farmers and ranchers all over the U.S.
Right on. Well, Tanner, you do a good job of that. Thanks for being on the podcast, man. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Casey.
Right on. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC, LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast, and go to the YouTube channel, which is on the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. Go to Moving Iron LLC for everything Moving Iron related. Get all the information for the upcoming Moving Iron Summit coming up here in Nashville, Tennessee, September 11th through the 13th. Good time to come to that. If you're really interested in doing that, that fills up here pretty quick. We're getting really close to being sold out. So if you want to come to that, send me an email at MovingIronPodcast at MovingIronPodcast.com if you need more information, or just fill out the information there on the website, and you'll get that all taken care of. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Tanner Ehmke. Let's go move some iron, folks. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century.